Hello, everyone. It's 3 p.m. Eastern Time now, so we're going to get started. Welcome to our webinar, Organic Field Crop Production and On-Farm Breeding. My name is Steph Hughes, and I'm the Regional Coordinator in the Atlantic Provinces for the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. It's a total pleasure to be hosting today's webinar with Martin and Anne on behalf of our two organizations, the University of Manitoba and the Bauta Family Initiative. So today we're going to hear from two presenters, Dr. Martin Entz, who will present on organic field crop production, and Anne Kirk, who will present on our on-farm participatory plant breeding program. After each presentation, we'll have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. For the Q&A, you can ask your question by typing it into the chat window on the bottom right corner of your screen. I'll be monitoring that window and pulling questions from a pool to ask to Martin and Anne, and we'll try to get to as many as we can today. So without further delay, we'll begin with Martin. For over 30 years, Dr. Martin Entz has been contributing valuable research to improve organic farming systems. Dr. Entz is a researcher at the University of Manitoba who actively studies organic cropping systems, including crop rotational benefits, green manure termination methods and timing, intercropping, and long-term organic versus conventional production systems. He's the founder of the Natural Systems Agriculture at the University of Manitoba, which explores cropping systems based on processes found in nature, specifically the natural grassland ecosystem of Prairie Canada. So that's your presentation loaded now, Martin, so I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to participate in this webinar today. I'm going to be advancing the slides as I go through the presentation, and I'm going to go through them in a manner that you can capture the information off each slide, but there may be a few slides that I'm going through a little quicker because they're really just making the same point in the form of a picture, an image. So again, my pleasure to be here. I represent a group of people here at the University of Manitoba that has worked for many years on cropping system design for organic production. And the four themes I want to cover today are on the screen: designing the crop rotation, and fertility, tillage, livestock integration, and a few points about crop management. But at the top of the list is designing the crop rotation. It is simply so important. It's central to the success of an organic system, and there's ways of setting oneself up for success. And let's talk about some of the fundamentals. The pictures that you're looking at on this slide, the bottom left, these are the Morrow plots at the University of Illinois, and today and in the past. And on the bottom right is an organic farmer in our region here turning their compost. So when I asked myself, when I started this program here at the University of Manitoba, what knowledge do we have existing that would help us to design better crop rotations and organic crop rotations, I turned to the history books right here at this institution, where the fertility fields were operated for quite a long time, over 40 years, and I just want to share some of the highlights from these long-term studies okay, hang on, I've got to get rid of something here. There we go. And these fertility fields taught us quite a bit about how to design an organic rotation, and I just want to give you one example. And it comes from a crop rotation that is a fallow wheat, corn, and then back to wheat. And the wheat is underlined on the slide because the next slide I'm going to show you it represents the wheat yields in that particular rotation. So up here on the top right, you can see the rotation again: fallow, wheat, corn, wheat, and we're looking at the wheat yields here. And on this axis, we've got the difference in yield compared to the check. And so what we have is the check is where we have a summer fallow phase in here, and then there are 4 different agronomic practices. The first one is just to let the weeds grow during that fallow year. And this is something that farmers often ask me about. What if I just let my weeds grow? That's a green manure, right? Well, if we look at the historical data from 1930 up to the late 1950s here, we can see that putting the weeds in the rotation did not help the yield compared to just tilling that fallow all year. What we've learned here in this rotation is that these cropping systems here that contained either peas or sweet clover or farm manure, they actually performed much better than if we just tilled the fallow that year or allowed the weeds to grow. And so that's one of the first lessons that our university was able to provide us to help us plan organic crop rotations. We had hard evidence that in a rotation like this, growing a legume in this fallow year was very critical, or spreading farmyard manure in that fallow year was really critical to the success of the rotation. And so the fertility fields, gave us some clues. So when we started our program here, we knew that to be sustainable, organic systems would need green manures. We learned that things like sweet clover were better than peas, probably because they produce more biomass. Weeds as green manures really don't work that well. And farmyard manures can also work extremely well. And the second thing we learned is that the effect of a good rotation gets stronger over time. The effects become more pronounced. And this is important for farmers to recognize. Like if we go back to this diagram, you can see for the first, oh boy, how many years is this? For the first, over 8 years, there wasn't a massive effect of these good rotations over just tilling this fallow. But then over time, the effect became quite a bit stronger. So there was, 4 bushel, 6 bushels, 7 bushel yield advantage of growing these crops in the system. Okay, so that's the fertility fields. There may be some questions about them later. The other thing that these scientists measured is the soil organic matter, and here in the prairie plains, very rich soils, and from the 1930s to the mid-50s, we were still in a period of organic matter decline, because when you till land, it just naturally loses organic matter, and that's an issue that we can talk about later. But this phase here, this period of time, there was still rapid organic matter loss, but there was a lower organic matter loss when legumes were put into the rotation, and that's a really important signal. Where are we now in terms of organic matter on these fields? Well, the fertility fields are now a football stadium, and so they're long gone, unfortunately. But had they remained, we probably would have bottomed out in terms of this organic carbon, and whether we're increasing carbon or not at this point would have depended on the management. Incidentally, the percent organic carbon here, that's on the left-hand column, to convert that to soil organic matter, you multiply it by 1.7. And this is good to know because sometimes people present things in organic carbon, sometimes in soil organic matter. So these are very, very rich soils. Okay, let's jump ahead. What have we done since then to help farmers design good organic systems? Well, we started the Glenlee study, and there's a picture of Anne, there's a colleague, Rob Golden, there's Iris Vaisman, there's Sarah Brayman, there's Gary Martins, there's Haroon, there's a lot of summer students, grad students who've worked on this study. And we started this in 1992 to really carry on some research on developing sustainable soil systems, but this time with a focus on organic agriculture. And okay, what have we learned here? A couple of highlights. Crop rotation important to success of organic farming. Duh, we know that. But here's some specifics. Here we have a grain-only organic system, and this is a flax crop growing in there. It doesn't look nearly as good as where we have an organic system that has both a forage phase and a grain phase. And so clearly, rotations that have these perennial phases do much better. Better weed control. You'll notice wild oats growing here, no wild oats growing here. And this picture was taken after 12 years of the study. So it's already starting to show some pretty big benefits. We know that manure or nutrient recycling is important in organic systems. And I think every farmer knows that. This picture is fascinating to me. I took this picture in 2000 at the Rothamsted plots, which are located just north of London, England. And they've been running these plots since 1843, so over 150 years. And it shows the value of manure, farmyard manure, very, very clearly. So we know that nutrient cycling is important. And we've also learned this at our Glenlee study. This, for example, is our organic rotation that has alfalfa for 2 years, and then it goes to wheat and then flax. And what happened in this rotation is we were cutting the alfalfa for hay, and we removed a lot of nutrients by doing that. And that was good business for us. If this was a commercial farm, you could sell this organic hay to an organic dairy and bring in a good return. The problem is not removing the hay. The question is, has any of that manure from those animals come back to the land? And so what we did is we actually split these plots, and well, a picture tells 1,000 words. Clearly, where we've added manure, the system is doing very well. Where we have just harvested the high nutrient dense alfalfa crop and not returned any of the nutrients, you can see it. The system has virtually collapsed. We continue to see this at Glenlee. And one question that I like to take farmers to this experiment, and one of the first questions they ask is, when did this happen? How many years? How many years did it take of this rotation for the system to really run out of phosphorus, which is what happened in this case? And the answer is, about in this soil, probably about 15 years. It took some time, but now it's been 23 years, and the effect is very, very strong. But of course, we can deal with that by recycling nutrients into those soils. And of course, in the organic business, we recommend or we require that the nutrients be composted, and that's really good. This is a compost turner. Composting, heats up. The temperature in that pile goes up, and that helps kill diseases. It kills many weed seeds, reduces the volume. There's less to spread, and we do not lose any phosphorus by reducing that volume. So we basically increase the concentration of the phosphorus. And then the question, is often how much manure to add. Well, one thing that is, I always try to emphasize with farmers is only add enough composted manure to overcome the phosphorus shortage. You do not need to add manure for nitrogen. You can use the legumes to supply the nitrogen. And you can see an example of that here. We just put relatively low levels of manure on here, not a lot. And it made the legume plant grow much better, and the legume is looking after the nitrogen input into the organic system. And that's a useful lesson. That's useful information for farmers, because many times manure is limited in terms of its supply, and it's also bulky to haul around. So, and it's expensive if you're buying it in. Now, at our Glenlee plots, I'll go through this quickly because this webinar is going to stay online, so you can come back to this if you'd like. But at the Glenlee plots, we put on about 80 pounds, I'm working in farmer terms here, of P2O5 every 4 years. So here's what we do. Like this year, for example, we got some composted organic dairy manures, 1.5% phosphorus. Farmers often think in terms of P2O5 because that's how they used to apply their fertilizer. So just for the heck of it, or as my friend would say, just for shits and giggles, I converted it to P2O5 times 2.3. So 1 ton of manure is about 3.45 kilograms of P2O5. About half of that, 50%, is available in the first year. So that's giving us 1.7 kilograms P2O5 per ton. We apply 23 tons per hectare. That gives us about 40 kgs of P2O5 in that year because half of it's available. And the other remaining 40% will be available over the next 3 years. So at Glenlee, we put this much manure on every 4th year, and that gives us a very, very nice effect. So how much manure to add? You know, if we look at it and on an annual basis, we're putting on about 5.8 tons per hectare per year, or in tons per acre, 2.6 tons per acre per year. So relatively low levels. And one of the concerns actually among farmers is how do you actually apply that little nitrogen, manure to a field? And so this is a farmer in Quebec who actually built a manure spreader, custom built a manure spreader to allow them to put on very low rates of composted manure. Okay, moving away from manure, one of the other lessons that we've learned in Canada is from the Breton plots at the University of Alberta. They're not necessarily organic plots, but they have taught us that in some soils, declining pH can be a threat to sustainability, and so some kind of a liming or some kind of an intervention is required. And I wish we were doing research in the days of the Breton plots. This is a lot easier way to show the effect of soil quality than all the statistical tools we use now. Low quality soil, little critters, high quality soil, big critters. Get it? Okay, let's switch gears. Let's talk about green manures in the rotation, because I had mentioned, you know, the legumes are really what we rely on for nitrogen in most operations, certainly in grain operations. So there, you know, the good news is there is a species for every condition. It's very dry, there's species like chickling vetch. If it's very wet, there's species like faba bean. If it's hot and wet, you can grow some soybeans, sorghum Sudan grass. There's many different legume species to choose from. One of the determining factors, if we look on the right-hand column here, is the cost per acre. One of the lowest cost legume green manure sources is sweet clover. You know, you can do a good job of growing a green manure for under $10 an acre. Something like hairy vetch is quite a bit more expensive. It does have a lot of other benefits. But I'll let you come back to this table and go through it on your own. But what I do want to do is illustrate just what the visual benefit of some of these green manures is. And let me just explain this picture. It's a crop of not oats but wheat. But what grew there last year was oats. Okay, so this is organic wheat growing on an oat green manure. It's our control plot. Okay, so you can burn that into your mind's eye. Here is organic wheat on a faba bean green manure, and you can see that this crop looks much better. Compare it back to the oat, up to the faba bean. You can see there's a nitrogen benefit. But then we often encounter some surprises. Here we have organic wheat growing on a mustard green manure. And of course, we all know that mustard does not fix nitrogen. It's not a legume. What's happening here? Same thing with buckwheat. When we use buckwheat as a green manure, we appear to be getting some nitrogen benefits, but we know that that's not a legume effect because buckwheat also is not a legume. And what I wanted to illustrate here is that while legumes are important because the faba bean crop did look the best, but some of these other non-legume green manures can be mixed in with the legumes sometimes to add other benefits. Sometimes they help to control some root diseases. Sometimes they solubilize phosphorus. So that's the point that I wanted to make. And we could spend a long time talking about, cocktails of plants to grow as green manures. Here's another illustration. Here we have, these are just 2 rows of organic potatoes. So the plot is just 2 rows in front of this sign. And here we have organic potatoes after sorghum Sudan grass green manure. And you can see the plants are smaller. They look okay. Sorghum Sudan grass is sometimes a very good disease-suppressing green manure. But the sorghum Sudan grass didn't do as well as the potatoes after the peas. But the potatoes after the buckwheat didn't do too badly. So again, we're seeing some of those other species that are non-legumes actually providing some benefits. And so we get a lot of, there's a lot of interest in green manures that have a high proportion of legumes in them, but are also have a few other species that can produce a few other services. I'm going to skip by this slide in the interest of time and go right to the next question. The next logical question is, okay, we're growing these green manures. We, conventional organic management is we disc them in the soil, and this is our senior technician here, Keith, disking them into the soil. And so does organic farming increase soil erodibility? Because, we're using a pretty aggressive tillage implement there. Well, bad tillage always causes erosion risks. But what we've learned at Glenlee is if we look at this column here, this is really this is the aggregate mean weight diameter. It's an indirect measure of the stability of the soil aggregates, their resistance to water erosion. And we can see that there is in this, for example, the grain-only rotation, we actually have a significantly higher erosion mitigation potential in the organic versus the conventional system. And if we just look at this comparison and ask ourselves, why would this be? Well, one of the reasons is that the organic systems have more mycorrhizal colonization. They tend to have more of these. Mycorrhiza are beneficial fungi which grow in the soil. And we typically observe higher levels in organic systems. And this has been documented in many places in the world. Here actually is the spores of the mycorrhiza from 100 grams of soil, where Kathy Welch, one of our very hardworking graduate students, washed them out of some soil. And in the conventional rotation, you can see relatively few versus the organic system. So what happens is these, when the plants grow in these soils, these spores will germinate and they'll infect the plant, gain a little bit of carbon from the plant, and then put out a very large network of hyphae, of little rootlets to go and explore the soil and help bind it together. And when we think about crop management in organics, whether you're using a rotary hoe or a weeding harrow, we do tend to manipulate these organic soils quite a bit. And so one of the ways we can make peace with the land here after having tilled it is to encourage those mycorrhiza to reestablish themselves and to reestablish those fungal roots which will bind the aggregates together. And one of the best ways of making peace with the land is to grow a cover crop. So when this crop is harvested, plant another cover crop. That is actually a very powerful tool. Nevertheless, organic farmers sometimes really have to rely on a lot of tillage to control their green manures, and it can cause problems. This is tilled fallow, and this is the crop that was till last year. This is a salinity patch. There's all kinds of problems with excess tillage. And so we've been doing research on sort of non-inversion tillage methods of controlling green manures. That last picture was a flail mower. This is a wide blade cultivator. And we also use the blade roller. And so the good news is there are some innovations on how to control green manures without as much tillage. And this is one of the innovations that Keith Bamford and a number of graduate students have worked with, where we no-till, this happens to be flax, we no-till organic crops into these mulches. And so we're very excited about this idea of using a roller and creating these mulches, which actually allow us to no-till, which is quite exciting for organic production. These mulches have traditionally been used in horticultural production, and we did a little bit of work a couple of years ago. Here's a tomato transplant in a hairy vetch mulch that has been blade rolled. And in this area, we took a sample to see how much mulch there was, the scientific approach to analyze how many kilograms per hectare. And where we removed the mulch, look at the weeds. You can see the mulch really does a very good job of suppressing the weeds. So these are some of the innovations around green manures. We've also been working on grazing the green manures in a way to make income in the year of the green manure. And that's very helpful. Our economists tell us that green manures cost us about $170 an acre to grow, and if we graze them, we can turn that into a $30 per acre profit. Here's an organic farmer in western Manitoba, and he's adopted this now. This is a green manure field, and he's had the animals graze through there, and he's calculating his profit here on his cell phone. So working for him. I'm just going to end with a couple of points about a couple of other sort of points about rotation management, because I'm almost out of time. This again, I have drawn this from some old research this happens to be from northern Alberta, where Agriculture Canada looked at ways of controlling wild oats, which are the number one weed for agriculture in Western Canada, and a significant problem in organic production as well. And they looked at a couple of things. Delayed seeding, 3 out of 6 years, reduced the wild oats by 87%. Very, very powerful effect. Fallowing, having a fallow every other year, like I showed you that picture a while ago with that salinity, that only reduced wild oats by 4%, not effective. Putting hay 3 out of 6 years, it did cut the wild oat population in half, but it still didn't do as good a job as delaying the seeding. And so, and fall rye 2 out of 6 years. Here's a picture of fall rye, the forgotten cereal, really. Very good organic crop. It also did an incredibly good job of suppressing wild oats. I love that this was published in 1963 because we used to know this stuff, and it's important. I do have a number of slides here on tillage, and I'm realizing I'm not going to have time to go through all of them, but I will turn to this figure, and I use this with my students to point out all the different places where tillage can be used in organic production. One of the important questions is this spring tillage. Do we till in the spring to stimulate weeds? Do we, and then seed? We know the weed emergence patterns are fairly well dictated, and they're controlled by the temperature of the soil. So, how do we, should we delay seeding? We saw that delayed seeding was working pretty well. Here's a picture from our Glenlee plots. That's early seeding, that's delayed seeding, and you can see the benefit on mustard control in flax. So changing the seeding time, mixing it up, can be very, very helpful, and something we could maybe talk about. In crop seeding, I'll let you look at this table on your own. It just talks about what the potential crop loss is from different seeding, different operations in different crops. Some crops are very resistant to in-crop tillage, some are not. And then fall tillage is very important for perennial weeds like thistles and quackgrass. Intercropping can also make the crop a little bit more competitive with weeds. This top picture here is flax and lentil. Very nice combination, keeps the lentils from falling on the soil and getting root rots and reducing their marketable quality. So I just wanted to throw those last things in because I thought maybe it would get some discussion going, and I'm going to turn the mic back to Stephanie at this time. Thank you very much for your attention, all 43 of you.
Thank you so much, Martin. That was a really so anyone who has a question for Martin, you can type it into the chat pod. One question has come in already. I just want to mention, as people let that information percolate and maybe come up with some questions, that I think we could make a darn good bumper sticker, Martin. It would read, "Make peace with the land, plant a cover crop." What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got, I love it. Should I read out the questions and answer them?
No, that's okay. I got this covered. So okay. Stuart Wells asks, what kind of tillage is used to kill alfalfa? That's our first question.
Nothing like starting with the most difficult question around, but very, very good question. Perennial plants typically require a significant amount of tillage to properly kill them, and that presents a real challenge in organic production. I think the kind of tillage, by that I think the questioner might ask, what tillage implement, and that depends on where you are. In some places, the plow, but in dryland areas, like in the southern prairies, that's a bit dangerous, and so the things that people are using are discs, deep tillers, discs in combination with deep tillers. The things that make it easier to kill a stand of alfalfa is not to let it get too old and too infested with grasses. We know that alfalfa growing for 3 years will pretty well maximize its nitrogen contribution to the field, so it would be best to kill it after 3 years when it doesn't have as large crowns and it isn't so infested with quackgrass, because many times the problem is not the quackgrass, the alfalfa, but the quackgrass. But a lot of tillage is required, and this is where a cover crop comes in. When the alfalfa has been killed, put a cover crop into it. Moisture content of the soil is also really important. If it's really dry and hard, that may not be a good year to terminate your alfalfa, because it's just going to make a mess of your seed bed. It's going to take up big chunks. So be opportunistic and control alfalfa in the years that are moist. Sometimes that means that killing the alfalfa in the springtime when there is moisture, but that can be very dangerous. You definitely need to plant a crop on that land later on. So I have not given you a good answer, because this is one area where there is still research to be done.
I think we had a related question come in. You mentioned that alfalfa will maximize its nitrogen in 3 years. Monty wrote to ask, if not harvested, how many pounds of phosphorus and nitrogen does it add per year? Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, phosphorus, it depends on how it's managed. If it's hayed, then it's removing all those nutrients. We really recommend that it actually be grazed, because then 70 to 90% of the nutrients will stay on the land, and so it'll just be recycled. You'll build up the nitrogen faster, and you won't export the phosphorus. But the rule of thumb for phosphorus removal with alfalfa is you're removing 15 pounds of phosphorus for every ton of hay. So you're removing a lot of phosphorus with your hay.
Okay. We have a question from James. What effect does hay and sweet clover have regarding nutrients added to the soil?
When sweet clover is grown as a green manure, it's a biennial. It's seeded the previous year. In the year that it's green manured, so to speak, at flowering time, the farmers have a choice. They could either harvest it for hay, they could disc it into the land, or mulch it with some kind of a flail mower, or they could wait and harvest it for seed. Harvesting it for hay removes most of the nitrogen that's been fixed and really reduces its nitrogen supply. And so we recommend farmers don't do that. Growing it for seed doesn't remove as much nitrogen, but it makes that nitrogen much more slowly available in future yields because the plant has become so lignified. And disking it in at flowering is the best way to get all that nitrogen back.
Okay, wonderful.
And maybe I should add, and you know, James might have been thinking about, well, we got to make this economical, and because otherwise we're taking a whole year off of production, and you know, land prices have really risen, and it's putting a crunch on farmers, and this is why grazing is a good alternative, because then you are actually putting whether pounds of milk or pounds of flesh on animals, and getting revenue from that land without losing that whole economic income that one year.
Okay. We've got a couple more have come in. I'll just take them in order. One is quite short and one is quite long. We should have time to cover at least these two, and then we'll do a time check and see. Frank writes, does a mulch cover control Canada thistle?
The mulch cover of hairy vetch barley that we've been growing produces about 11 to 13 tons per hectare of dry matter. It will give you 1 year of thistle control, but it won't give you long-term thistle control. So, but hairy vetch will climb over the thistle, and the combination of the plant competition and the blade roller, which will crimp the top of the thistle, can do quite a good job, but you won't eliminate it. For thistle management, we've seen so many times on farms and in the literature, strategic fall tillage, cutting, mowing, growing cover crops, those are all good strategies.
Great. Next up, we have a question from Tom. Bear with me, I'm just going to read it. So Tom appreciated your comments on tillage in organic systems not adversely affecting soil texture, but still has some concerns. To revisit that for a moment, how much tillage was used in the study, do you know? And was it also taking into consideration all of the tillage needed for weed control? What would you say is the comparison against a no-till conventional system?
Okay, that's a very good question. In our Glenlee study, we're doing exactly the same amount of tillage in the conventional and the organic systems. And so under those exact same tillage regimes, we find that the aggregate stability is greater in the organic soil. And the organic soil is just more lively. It has more biodiversity, and including in that is the aggregate stability is stabilizing fungi. There is a study in Montana where they have compared organic soils with conventional no-till, and there's no question that conventional no-till with a good rotation is good for soil stability. And anytime you expose your soil with tillage in the organic system, you are creating a threat, and that's why the cover crops are so important. I think the organic reduced till system with cover crops is providing perfectly adequate soil erosion protection, which is really what we're after. The conventional no-till systems that are using cover crops and perennials, they can build up very excellent soils. They have to work a little harder because the nature of the phosphorus additions into conventional soils makes their mycorrhiza a little bit lazy. And so anyways, that's I think the way I think about it, Tom, is what's the threshold that we have to be above with soil stability, and I know that we can get above that threshold in organic systems with proper management, and we can also be above that threshold in conventional no-till.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll take one more. I noticed that multiple participants are typing in. We're going to take one more for now, move on to Anne's presentation, and then if we have time at the end, we'll address a couple more questions to Martin. So our last question for you, Martin, for now is from Dwayne, and it is, how does red clover fit into the legumes?
Oh, I love that question because I am a redhead, so anything with red clover in is my favorite question. Red clover it really provides some of the same benefits as sweet clover, and it's got some, it doesn't fix nitrogen as well as sweet clover. So in the dry land area, sweet clover is better, but it is more flooding tolerant, it is more tolerant of acid soils, and it is more shade tolerant. So it's a really good fit into wetter parts of the country, like lower mainland of BC and southern Ontario and the Maritimes. We do also use it sometimes in southern Manitoba, especially in the Red River Valley where it's a bit wetter. Red clover is easy to establish. I would say the short answer is it's a very important crop in an organic system. And it is also relatively easy to kill, and with minimal tillage, and that helps. So a useful crop, and one of our many green manures that are available to us.
You actually have a couple minutes, so because the next question is also related to red clover, we'll take that one too. So Barbara's question is intercropping red clover with market garden vegetable possible?
Anything is possible, Barbara. You know, the question is, you know, are the risks and the benefits worthwhile? I think in a market garden vegetable system, you might want to be a bit more specific on that question when we have time later. But if you're talking about just putting a strip of red clover between rows of, let's say, tomatoes or another transplant or planted crop, you know, that red clover can provide good soil stability between those. It can add nitrogen, especially for next year's crop, if you put the tomatoes on where the red clover was last year. So these things can all be useful. And as you probably know, there's also an interest in mowing things like red clover and pushing that residue onto the row of the vegetable crop to feed it nutrients. That's a very effective system, and it's being used more and more in different applications. So I am not really well versed in market garden production. I don't know what the risks are in terms of insects. I would imagine that the red clover will house some pollinators, and that'll be good. But that's kind of the extent of my knowledge.
Great. That's really wonderful. Thanks very much, Martin. Jose, I see your question there as well, so we'll try to get to that in our second Q&A following Anne Kirk's presentation. So we're going to move on to that now. Anne is the coordinator of the Participatory Plant Breeding Program at the University of Manitoba, and she farms with her family in southern Manitoba. She coordinates the Participatory Plant Breeding Program for the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security, and she's previously worked in Saskatchewan doing applied on-farm research and at the University of Manitoba in the Organic Wheat Breeding Program, and is also on the Organic Crop Improvement Association and Education Board of Directors. So we're super happy to have Anne with us, and your presentation is loaded there now, Anne. So I'll give it over to you.
Great, thanks, Steph. It's great to see so many people here today and to have this discussion as a group. It's great. So I'll be talking about the on-farm breeding program and a bit of the research that we've done in the last year looking at the farmer selections under organic cropping systems. So for the Participatory Plant Breeding Program came out of the Organic Plant Breeding Program that we've done in conjunction with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada since 2003, mainly to address the unique challenges that organic farming systems have compared to conventional farming systems. And we found that by selecting crops under organic management, we can improve crop performance in organic systems. So taking organic plant breeding a further step, we wanted to involve farmers in the breeding process. Some of the reasons why we thought it would be important is by having farmers actually grow and select these populations on their own farms. We thought we'd be developing populations with adaptations necessary to thrive under organic production systems, so these systems that are potentially higher stress than their conventional counterparts, and also that populations can be developed that are specifically suited to a farmer's preferences. We know that most farmers are interested in things like high yield, disease resistance, good quality crops, but each farmer does have specific things that they're looking for. For example, in this program, some farmers are looking for taller wheat or oat varieties, some are looking for shorter ones. Some farmers are looking for crops that perform really well when intercropped with a cover crop or with another grain crop. So each farmer participating has unique needs, unique soil type, and unique farm. So that's why we thought it would be really great to have farmers involved in this project. So farmer involvement can take a couple of different forms in a breeding program, either by participating further on in a breeding program by looking at advanced lines, for example, and deciding which lines in a breeding program we might want to submit for registration, or by actually participating in the plant breeding process by selecting segregating populations. So that's what this breeding program is doing. So first of all, I'm going to start by talking about a project that we did this last year where we looked at the field performance of farmer-selected wheat populations. The photo up on the screen is a picture of one of the farmer breeders that was involved in the project for the first round, so who made selections on their farm from 2011 to 2013, standing beside his wheat plot in the trial at Carmen. So the farmer participation breeding program started in 2011 with wheat. So I'm going to be giving a bit of an overview of how the farmer participatory breeding programs actually work. So the little picture I have here of the wheat with crossing bags on it in a greenhouse is over Winnipeg. So the actual crossing and seed increase takes place at the research station in Winnipeg. So the initial cross, then we do a seed increase in the greenhouse. So this would be the first generation, the F1. And then after the seed increase in the greenhouse, I would take that F2 seed, plant it out in the field, and produce third generation wheat seed, which is going to be sent to farmers to select on. So this picture here shows the farmers that were involved in the participatory breeding program in 2011, 12, and 13. So the little wheat pictures are over all of their farms. So from the seed increase at the university, we send seed out to farms. Most farmers select 3 populations, have been selecting in 3 populations, and they grow a plot about 20 meters squared. So farmers do plant in different ways. The picture up on the screen is actually of Stuart Wells' field near Swift Current. For this field, when he's seeding his regular field, after he's done the area, when he doesn't have any seed in the seed tank, he would go over the area where the plots are going to be planted with his regular seed drill, just empty, to make furrows in the ground. And then later he'd come back with his garden seeder, one of those small push seeders, and just plant within the furrows that are already established. And that really ensures that you can have nice straight rows that are the same distance apart as you would regularly plant your wheat. So I really do encourage people to conduct selections under the same conditions that you would typically grow your crop. This is a picture of one of the farmer populations in a field near Oxbow, Saskatchewan. And you can see the population just because it's a little bit shorter than his typical wheat variety. But it's really planted right within the wheat field and would be subject to all the same practices that you would typically do. So it's important to have, approximately the same weed density, the same soil fertility. If you're going to be harrowing your regular crop, just to harrow the participatory breeding plots as well. And this way we can really be looking at selecting a population that is well suited to the conditions that you typically find on your farm. So most farmers would conduct both negative and positive selection throughout the growing season. So with negative selection, you'd really be going out to the plots throughout the year and getting rid of the plants that have something that you don't like. Whether it is diseases like fusarium or rusty leaves, or it's too tall or too short, to actually physically pull that plant out of the plot so that you don't accidentally select it later on. And then at the end of the year, do positive selection, where you're taking spikes or panicles from the plants that have everything you like. So they might be the right height, have good disease resistance, the spikes might be the right size. So just making selections on the plants that you do like at the end of the year. So at the end of the year, the spikes or panicles were harvested, put into cloth bags, and then sent back to Winnipeg, where they're threshed and cleaned at the University of Manitoba. And then after the threshing and cleaning, they're sent out to the farmers for another round of selection. So we wanted to know, after doing the first 3 years of on-farm selections, we wanted to know how the farmer selections compare to commercial check cultivars. So how what the farmers are selecting would compare to what they would currently have available for seed. This is a picture of a farmer in Alberta making selections in his oat plots. This is a slide just showing the treatments that were involved in the study this year. So the top 23 are the farmer-selected populations, which we compared to the check cultivars. So I just wanted to mention, for the next few slides, I analyzed the farmer-selected populations as a group and the check cultivars as a group, just to show the differences in the characteristics between the farmer-selected populations and the checks. So the first, I did look at a whole bunch of characteristics, agronomic characteristics throughout the growing season, and we're also looking at quality, seed quality and baking quality, which I don't have those results yet. So for this table, the left-hand bar is the farmer-selected populations, and the right is the checks. So for early season vigor, with a 1 to 4 rating scale, with 4 being more vigorous, the farmer-selected populations were more vigorous than the checks. When taking into account the general health and appearance of the plants, how fast they covered the rows, and how tolerant they were to harrowing. So there were no differences between the farmer-selected populations and the checks. Percent leaf disease on the flag leaf at either maturity or at flowering. So it's just interesting to see that when the farmers were making selections in their populations, they were selecting for wheat that is just as disease resistant as the check average. And just going back to that, we had a fair year for disease, and you can just see that on average about 6-7% of the flag leaves did have disease symptoms on them. So these were pretty good looking plots. In terms of height, we really saw that the farmer selected populations did tend to be quite a bit taller than the checks. So on average, they were 9 centimeters taller than the check populations, just showing on average that the farmers are leaning towards taller varieties. And when you look at these heights, the farmers selected average about 100 centimeters, where the checks are probably about 91. So 100 centimeter wheat is, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the checks are really moving towards shorter wheat. So what we see on the market does tend to be quite a bit shorter than even wheat that we were seeing 5 or 10 years ago. In terms of days to maturity, the farmer-selected populations matured about 4 days later than the check populations. And this is something that if people are wondering, how to make selections for shorter days to maturity, it would really just be visiting your plots often, and then when you go out and you see that some of the spikes are starting to turn and others are still green, if you're really interested in days to maturity, you could just take your scissors out and cut off the spikes that are still quite green during that time. And I know that it's a busy time of year to make selections, but if people do find the time, if they're interested in this, it's good to find the time to just visit those plots once in a while. So for the lodging, we also did see that the farmer-selected populations did lodge a little bit more than the checks. This is just showing the lodging scale that we would typically use. So a rating of 1 would be erect stems with no breakage, and a rating of 9 would be plots that are flat on the ground. The farmer-selected populations on average rated about a 3, as you can see in this picture, while the conventionally selected checks were rated at about a 2. And lodging is another characteristic that is pretty tough to select for in the field, and in a breeding program, say when you're starting off with thousands of plots at a certain generation, the breeders would just go in and look for any of the stems that are bent and just take those entire plots out at that point to avoid a situation where you do end up with some lodging in the field. I should also mention that we would expect more lodging with taller wheat as well. So in terms of yield, the farmer-selected populations did yield significantly greater than the checks. On average, they were about 3 bushels per acre or 200 kilograms per hectare higher yield than the check population. In terms of kernel weight and kernel number, the farmer-selected populations did have, it wasn't significant, but the kernels were a bit smaller than the checks, or they weighed a bit less, but they made up for that by having more kernels per unit area. So we did see that the farmer-selected populations did tend to have more tillers and more viable heads per tiller per plant. So in general, how did the farmer selections compare to the commercial check cultivars? We did see better early season vigor early on in the growing season, which might be really good for wheat competition. They matured a bit later. They weren't significantly different for disease characteristics at maturity. I also did look at fusarium and rust, and we didn't really see any significant differences for those diseases either. They did tend to be quite a bit taller and had increased lodging, but they did have higher yield than the checks. So what are farmers selecting for? Why are we ending up with populations with these characteristics? This is just a list of the characteristics that farmers have indicated that they're interested in selecting for throughout the growing season. We can see that things like competitive ability, seed size, tillering, tolerance to herring, those are things that are important to organic farmers. And this is really the unique thing about having a participatory breeding program is farmers that are organic farmers can actually select for these characteristics that are important for them. In the conventional breeding program, they probably wouldn't be looking at. So one of the unique things about this project is that we did have there were 4 populations that were distributed to more than one farmer. So it allows us to see how the person making the selections and the actual selection environment influence the population. So I did mention that the farmer-selected populations on average were about 9 centimeters taller than the checks. This is an example of the same population, BJ10, that was distributed to farmers SC and KB. And you can see here that we actually ended up with a 17 centimeter height difference after 3 years of selection from the 2 different farmers that were conducting selections on their own farms. This is really interesting to see that when you think about the F3 population, it would have a lot of diversity in the field. So these farmers are starting off with a population with a lot of diversity, and over 3 years of selection are really able to shape that population into what they're interested in. Another good example is days to maturity. So this is the population BJ08, and we saw a 5-day difference in days to maturity from the selections made by 2 different farmers. So this would most likely be explained by the environmental conditions that these 2 farmers are selecting in. So the farmer that selected the wheat with shorter days to maturity was farming near Brandon, Manitoba, and the farmer selecting the wheat with higher days to maturity was making those selections in Carmen. There's about a 10-day difference in the frost-free period. So the farmer in Carmen that's selecting for a later maturing variety has about 10 extra days, growing days in the growing season than the farmer in Brandon. So it really makes sense that the farmer in Brandon would be selecting for a wheat that has to mature quicker because they just don't have as long of a growing season. So some of the lessons that we've learned from this first round of this breeding program is that the farmer-selected populations do appear better adapted to organic production than the checks. We do see a huge influence of the individual farmer and the selection environment on the population. And we did also learn that the farmers want to stay in the parents. So we have a lot of options for what parental varieties to use in the breeding program, and having farmers' input is really important to the farmers and also to us. It really helps make sure that we're choosing the right parents and creating the populations that the farmers are interested in. So since 2011, when this breeding program started, the program has expanded to include oats and potatoes and has expanded to farmers all across Canada. This is just a picture here of two of the most eastern farmers located in the that are part of the breeding program, doing the wheat and oats. This is just an example of two of the farmers that were interested in actually having a say in the parental varieties that were being used to create their populations. So each year when I send out the populations, I do send out small packages with registered varieties that could be commonly grown in those areas for farmers to plant out, just so that they can compare the population that they're growing on their farm to some registered checks. So as well as comparing your population to them, it could be a good time to just look at these registered varieties and see if any of those are actually well suited to organic production, or if some of them have characteristics that you'd be interested in a future population, so we could use those as a parent in the future. This slide here shows the participatory wheat and oat breeding model. So I didn't really talk a lot about the oat breeding program, but the oat breeding program does run the same as the wheat breeding program. It starts off with the farmers and researchers working together to choose parents for the breeding program. On the research station, the parents are crossed, the seed is increased, and then from the F3 to the F5 generation, all the work is done on farm on a farmer's field. The populations are grown on farm, and the selections are made by the farmer using the characteristics that they think are important. After that, we'll do trials to assess the agronomic performance at a research station, and at that point, the farmer can continue selecting for a locally adapted population. I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk about the participatory program as well. The participatory potato breeding program currently has just 6 farmers involved across the country. We're hoping to get more farmers involved this spring. So the participatory potato breeding program is quite similar actually to the wheat and oat breeding program, with the big difference of the crops, obviously. So the initial crosses for the potato program are made at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Potato Research Centre in Fredericton. The crosses are made, and then the seed that's resulting from those crosses is planted in the greenhouse to produce mini tubers. So for each population, we end up with about 500 mini tubers that are distributed to farmers. This is just an example of some of the populations that were available in 2013 that those 6 farmers are growing this year. So generally the farmers in the potato breeding program chose their population based on the segregation for skin color. I did really have noticed working with farmers across the country the differences in preferences for skin color and potato texture. So those are the characteristics that the farmers participating are looking for. So in the first year of on-farm selection, I'll just show a picture of what this would actually look like in the field. So the middle 4 rows is the farmer's participatory potato population. And you can see that those are bordered on either side by the farmer's regular potato varieties. Within this, the potatoes do tend to be space planted in the first year just so that each individual hill can be harvested without fearing that you're going to mix up tubers from one hill to the next. So you can see that there are quite a few spaces in this population where tubers were planted that either just had poor vigor or some characteristics that the farmer wasn't interested in, so they might have been pulled out. So those 500 tubers are planted in the first year, and then the farmers would select anywhere from 20 to 50 tubers to move forward to the next year. In the second year of selection, sorry, I missed this slide here. So as I said, in the first year of selection, you'd keep approximately 50 hills, or choose those to move forward to the next generation. And from each of those 50 hills, 1 tuber was selected per hill for planting the next year. So generally the way the farmers made selections in the first year was by actually looking at those potatoes, assessing the skin color, the shape of the potatoes, the size of the potatoes, and also to look for diseases such as scab. And the selections were generally made based on the tuber appearance. So in the second year of the potato breeding program, each of those selected tubers was cut into 4 pieces and planted as a unit. And then about 15, anywhere from 5 to 15 of those tuber units were selected to move forward to the next generation. In this photo here, it's a photo of the second year potato selections grown on a farm in Manitoba. So in this year, just having that 4 seed piece potato unit allows the farmers to look more at agronomic characteristics and perhaps even dig up one of those hills midway through the growing season to look at the potential for early potatoes or how those are looking earlier on. So from those selected tubers, I know I'm going through this the potato portion quickly, and can be a little confusing. So this will be available online later. So after the second year of selection, you end up with quite a few tubers, because for each selected tuber unit, you'd be keeping all those tubers. And then a portion of those tubers is going to the research station where they're planted, and they'll be looking at yield, disease resistance, and then also looking at boiling and baking quality. And then a portion is also staying with the farmer, where they'll continue to evaluate the agronomic characteristics, the yield, and also the tuber appearance. So it's really, this shows a good example of the benefits of working with farmers and researchers, or having farmers and researchers work together. While the farmer has a good eye for the agronomic characteristics they're interested in, as well as what sort of tubers and characteristics their customers want, the research station has some resources to actually evaluate yield, look more at disease resistance, and then also having the research station involved in looking at baking and boiling quality is a real benefit. So the farmers and researchers can come together with the data they've collected, and then the farmers can decide which of those tuber units they might want to look at commercializing or increasing more in the future. So just to close off, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've learned from the participatory breeding program. So one of the things that I have noticed is some farmers are not confident in their ability to make selections within their population. So this is something that I think is interesting, because I guess it really shows the disconnect between some of the research that's been going on, the research station and the field. So I think farmers sometimes think that what we're doing at the research station is very complicated, and we're really taking into, we're taking a lot of things into consideration when we're making selections. But really the plant breeders are doing exactly what the farmers would be doing in the field. When we're planting out single rows, we're walking along and looking to see which rows have a lot of diseases and then getting rid of those. Or we're looking to see if certain populations are too tall or too short, or lodging. So really what the farmers, or what you think of in terms of what a good population would look like on your farm, it's best just to go with that and make selections based on what kind of characteristics you'd like to see growing. We do know now that having farmers participate in parental line selection is very beneficial. So the picture of the farmers that I showed from the East Coast, which one of them had some specific suggestions for parents, I actually have seed populations available this year that incorporate those parents in the populations. So he'll be able to grow those on his farm and make selections from parents that he's kept an eye on over the years and decided that would make good parents for an organic breeding program. We also know that farmers that are dissatisfied with the currently available varieties do put the most effort into improving their populations. I've definitely noticed this with the potato farmers compared to the wheat and oat farmers. So in some regions of Canada, there are quite a few conventionally selected wheat and oat populations that farmers are fairly happy with. They've been growing them in their field, and they do perform quite well under organic conditions. That's not to say there isn't room for improvement. But I have noticed that a lot of the potato farmers do tend to be more dissatisfied with what's currently available in the marketplace. So it is interesting when you talk to some of the potato farmers, their list of what they're looking for in a potato tends to be quite long. So it's really great to give these farmers the opportunity to make selections on their own farms for the characteristics that their customers are really interested in. interested in. I just wanted to say thank you to all of the farmers, especially the farmers that are involved in this program. So we currently have about 45 farmers across Canada that are participating in the on-farm breeding program. So this program definitely wouldn't be a success without all of the farmers involved. There's also lots of researchers across Canada involved. We do have a lot of these documents explaining the participatory breeding program as well as some other presentations and papers up on our Natural Systems Agriculture website. So if you would like more information on the program, take a look at the website or also just send me an email. So that's it for today for me.
And thanks to both of you for being so concise with your presentations. We're right on time, and we have preserved a few minutes for Q&A. So while participants think about questions that they might have about the PPB program for Anne, I'll go back to our kind of parking lot. And Jose had a question for you, Martin. The question was, in a mixed forage grazing system, how many years out of 10 could the soil be tilled without decreasing the soil organic matter?
Okay, that's for me, I assume. Yeah, great question. I don't have an easy answer for that. I just know that when we look at long-term studies that have been around for, let's say, 50 years, especially within agriculture and agri-food Canada, they've established a lot of good crop rotation studies. The important thing in that question was the mixed forage system. Putting the perennial into the 10-year rotation really heals a lot of wounds in that soil. And in fact, the way that I would look at that question is to also ask myself, how many years out of 10 does that land need to be in a perennial plant? And I think the answer there is probably something like 4 to 5 years. Because, excuse me, even if there was some excessive tillage needed for things like, let's say, quackgrass control, the perennial really heals a lot of the damage done to those soils. So not a good answer, but that's what I'll just leave it at that for now.
Okay, great. And our first question to you is coming from Chris, who says that you mentioned soil nutrient limitations as a challenge at the beginning, but he's wondering if this situation could be used to actually develop more resilient and efficient crops.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and I think that we can definitely use the challenges in organic agriculture to our advantage. So I really think that by selecting these crops in, say, nutrient-limited conditions or conditions where you don't have the nutrients available at the same time as you would if you're applying fertilizer, you're really should be able to develop crops that are better able at more nutrient use efficient, maybe develop stronger root systems that are able to access some of those nutrients. And really, if we're always applying large amounts of fertilizer, at certain times in the growing season, those crops really don't have to work very hard. Whereas we're selecting for crops that are working hard and really thriving in organic conditions.
And I'll just add a comment to that, and that is that there is now significant scientific evidence to show that the questioner's logic is right on. Selecting plants under these stressful conditions does switch on a lot of sort of self-defense mechanism genes in plants, and unless you would have exposed those plants to those stresses, those genes would have never been favored, and so the questioner is bang on in their assessment.
Great. The questions are coming in here pretty quickly. I see one from Stuart that's actually related to a question of mine, so I'm going to skip over it for the time being and go to a question from Monty, which is there any way to cross a legume with wheat to make a wheat that will fix nitrogen?
I'm going to answer that question. The answer is not to my knowledge, but one thing I will say is that the Egyptians about 1997 published a paper where they noticed some endophytic rhizobia in wheat, which means the first step toward making wheat nitrogen fixing was actually observed in the wheat. And those rotations had a lot of legumes in them. So the folks at Ag Canada Swift Current, Bix Biederbeck, he looked at the wheat in a legume wheat rotation there and found exactly the same thing. So I would say what we know right now is that rotations with legumes allow wheat to set up to associate with soil organisms in a way that a rotation that doesn't have legumes doesn't allow. So I think the answer is no, but by not thinking about blending legumes and grain seeds, but actually blending cereal and legume rotations, there's some benefit.
Right. Cool. We're going to go to a question from James, which is, which newer wheat varieties do well under organic systems? And I'll maybe throw that out to Anne first.
Sure. Well, James is located farms close to Winnipeg, so we have looked at quite a few different wheat varieties. I would say that in our trials, say this last year, we had probably about 9 different wheat varieties. And a lot of the newer wheat varieties, so in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, varieties like Brandon or Glen or Carberry do tend to be quite popular. Those looked really well throughout the growing season, but just really didn't have a great yield. Unity did quite well under organic systems, and Cadillac also does really well. It's developed later in the 90s, so it's not really a new variety, but there are some varieties that do stand out. And if any farmers are interested, I do have a collection of some research results from us as well as other researchers showing some organic yields across Canada.
But Anne, isn't it what you said, though, one of the things that I got out of your answer is that some of the brand new varieties actually didn't perform very well under organic.
No. And these ones, like...
That's true?
Yeah, that's
okay.
true.
Right.
Some of the brand new ones for our area, they are fairly short. Like, I think some of the highest yielding wheats right now are, I think, about 84 centimeters. So it's a really short wheat variety. And I just don't know... You know, they looked fairly good in the field, but they just really didn't have the yield that you would like to see.
That's really interesting. Okay, we have 3 questions on deck, including mine. I'm going to jump to Helen first, who is asking, in the work on PPB wheat by Isabelle Goldringer in France, Isabelle was a presenter at a recent conference, farmers wanted to select shorter wheats, but discovered they were actually selecting taller plants inadvertently because they're the most obvious spikes in the stand. Have you had a chance to show these results to some of the participants? And do you think the same thing might be happening here, causing a general increase in height that is not necessarily intentional? Is Helen's question.
Yeah, that's a great question, Helen. I think that in some cases that was what farmers were doing. There are quite a few farmers involved in the program that don't really have a strong preference for taller, shorter wheat. So those farmers, I think that it's very likely that they would be perhaps selecting some of the taller spikes in the stand if they're not really actively thinking about what height they would like to see. I do know that there are some farmers that are specifically looking for shorter wheats, and I think that those farmers are achieving their goals of selecting for a shorter or maybe more medium height wheat. And there actually is, I think if they're keeping in mind their goal in terms of height while they're actually making the selections, they are able to move towards a shorter wheat variety. But yeah, it is. They're the most obvious ones, and when you walk up to the plot, you definitely notice the taller wheat variety or the taller wheat plants. So yeah, it's a good point, and it's something for the farmer breeders to keep in mind when they're making selections.
So we'll go to Stuart's question now, which is, and I'll have a part 2 to add on to this question. So Stuart writes, with 45 farmers involved, are you looking to increase the number, and by how much? And so my related question to you both, is that for any farmers who might be on the line considering doing this work formally or informally, I'm wondering if you could both speak quickly to what inspires you about the work and what you would say to those farmers. And I guess I'll put that out to Martin first, perhaps.
Okay. I was just going to answer Stuart's question first. So we do have plants growing in the greenhouse right now, and seed that we've also increased in the field from last year. So we do have, I think for wheat, we probably have about 8 new populations that are available for farmers, and we have enough seed to send each of those populations out to 5 farmers. So we could have up to, say, 15 new wheat farmers this year. Oats, we'll also have new populations available. Some of them are coming from Ag Canada, and some of them are coming from crosses that I've done. So we'll have oats for at least 6 to 8 new farmers this year, and we'll have a better idea probably later in February. So yes, we're looking for new farmers, and if anyone's interested or knows farmers that might be interested, yeah, I'd like to hear from you.
So I got the question, did I hear it correctly that you want us to tell you what might be inspiring for a farmer to get involved?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it is a bit of a time commitment, and that it's really important to recognize that there is a little investment involved. But I think there's a number of things. One is farmers who have any experience with a herd of animals know how exciting it is to see the genetics of the herd change based on the farmer's own ideas about, what type of herd they want. And we see this kind of, genetic farmer involvement in the genetics of animal agriculture all the time. Why not in crops? Now that we've actually been through this pilot project that Anne described, I'm really surprised that 3 years of selection would allow the same, family of plants to be actually that different based on what the farmer was looking for. So I think there's a lot in it for farmers in terms of actually designing something for their place. There's a few practical considerations. If you're selling in the export market, these varieties are not you can't take them to the grain elevator right now. You need a place locally, or you need to process them before you export them. But they could come back into the main breeding programs, and then the farmer would have actually contributed to a national variety. And so there's a number of utilization streams that these things can go into as well. So, but and then the farmers get drawn into a community of 45 other farmers across the country, and we can sit together on days like today and discuss things and learn from each other. So I think there's a real reason for farmers to take it seriously. I guess one last point is they actually control their crop genetics. That story, I forgot about that one. I always tell farmers, you're not buying seed anymore, you're just leasing it, because you have to give it all back at the end of the year, and I think that needs to stop, or at least farmers need choices. So I'll end there.
Great, thanks, Martin. What about you, Anne?
I guess I think that this whole program is really exciting, and I see, especially with this last year of the on-farm breeding program, I've really seen how farmers can contribute to selecting a variety that is really well suited to their farming system. So I think that that's probably the most encouraging thing, and something that makes farmers pretty proud and pretty excited when they see what a difference they can make with just a few years of on-farm selection. So one example, a good example from these last few years, is a farmer that farms just north of Dawson in Manitoba, and they've had a pretty terrible go of things the past few years. Like, they've had droughts and floods in the same year, and it's been cold. So each year, she said that her growing conditions and where they're selecting is just terrible. Like, they've had terrible crops. But when I looked at her selections this past year, hers was the highest yielding wheat overall. And it's just really interesting to see, maybe stressing these plants out and selecting them under pretty adverse conditions, we're really selecting for plants that just perform really well under what are sometimes challenging organic conditions. So I think that's really encouraging and really exciting to see. And like Martin said, having some control and choice in what you're growing and being able to actually put your own spin on things is pretty exciting.
Yeah, indeed. As you mentioned in your presentation, we have just a couple of farmers out east who are involved in this work, and it's been really inspiring to work with them and participate a little bit in kind of the collective learning curve of this work, and I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention that there's actually a few farmers in BC that are in traditional grain growing regions, so regions where there used to be federal government research centers looking at cereals, and there really just isn't anyone growing cereals anymore. So these are really areas that are really well suited for wheat and oat production, and there's no one doing research on them. So having these farmers involved and being able to help out, reinvigorate this cereals in those regions is really exciting, and it's really important work. So it's great to have these farmers involved in, all across Canada, and also to see, what makes these farms different and what makes them similar.
Awesome. I want to thank both of you, Anne and Martin, for your presentations and for your time putting this information together for us. It's been a wonderful learning opportunity and a terrific opportunity to also highlight the terrific work that you guys are doing. To those of you on the line from across Canada, also thank you so much for joining us. I'll take a moment and mention that our next webinar will be on quality assurance and ecological seed production, and that's happening January 28th, so in 2 weeks' time at 4 p.m. Eastern. All of the details are available on our website, seedsecurity.ca. So thanks very much, everyone, and we'll talk to you next time.